This episode is sponsored by World Anvil. World Anvil is an award-winning world building and writing software for people who love to create rich and exciting worlds.
Dungeon crawlers.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I got your consent before I hit record. Anyway. All right. So one more question. I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to give you the breakdown here in just a second. We just asked you what talking points you absolutely need us to hit. Are there any talking points that we should not talk about? Is there anything that we should not ask about?
How the book ends.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. I know you wouldn't do that. No, I don't think so. Yeah, whatever you like.
Very first question out of my mouth. So how does it end? How does it is it a sunset? Is there a moon? Is there a space station?
Nope, it's a giant moon.
Giant moon.
Yeah.
That's no space station.
That's
a moon.
No moon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So the three of us, Matthew, myself, and Daniel, we often will try to communicate with each other using nonverbal clues or cues of any kind. You'll often see us hold up some sort of object. I have this ping pong paddle. My brother Matthew has a Rubik's Cube, and Daniel has a Sith holocron. No, he has the fourth chakra, and so we hold these up. We hold these up, and what we're doing there is we're saying that we have something we'd like to add on to what's being spoken. The person who is speaking, especially anything works, my friend. I like your chakra. Go back to the chakra.
All right.
Whoever is speaking, especially if it's you, Brandon, should not feel rushed to hand the baton over. All we're saying is we have something we want to say once you're done, but take your time, make your point, perfectly fine. And then we tend to, I know we're on Zoom, but we tend to nod at each other or point, and that's how we sort of pass the baton. Feel free, if you would like to join in on that kind of communication, just have some object that you hold up when you want to say something, but you're gonna be talking a lot because we're gonna be asking you a lot of questions, so you shouldn't have to worry about it too much.
And you don't have to have something. You are the priority of the show. So
as we
I have a stud detector for some reason.
Nice.
Keeps going off when I hold it. As we start the show, you'll hear the three of us do a sound sync clap type thing. You don't have to do any of that. That is just what we do because of the way that we edit the audio in post. So you're taken care of. You're being grabbed. Oh, did we just lose Daniel? Just as
No, you didn't.
Oh, just the camera. Okay.
I'm cleaning my camera lens.
That's fair.
There
fair.
we go.
Okay. I'm trying to get my audio set up as well. Matthew and I tend to capture our audio independently, and that's why we do the sound synchronization stuff. You don't have to do any of that. Just be patient with us. Once we do our sound sync, Daniel will kick the show off, and it'll be very obvious where you'll jump in.
Yeah. Okay.
And after you do the intro, Daniel, I noticed that a lot of times we've been forgetting to introduce who's with us. And since our cast keeps changing, it might be helpful to the listeners to introduce each person as well as our guest.
That is true.
And
that is true.
they've been listening long enough. They should know who we are.
They should. They should.
I know. It was just me and you last week. Come on. We did two
I
great
know, that
shows,
was easy.
and Josh was sitting on a beach in Jamaica.
I know, the loser. He missed out on the awesome author interviews.
I did.
He's
But the
so
indictment
jealous.
I face will be worth it. No, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, it was
All right.
fun. It was a good time. Hang on one second. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think I'm good. I'm gonna go ahead and start. You guys ready to go?
Yep, I'm ready.
Yep.
It says I'm peaking my mic like crazy.
This
I'm
be
not a big
better.
fan of that. Hang
Hold
on one
on.
second.
Let me see. Does this
Lightsaber.
no, not too much.
Give me 1 second, guys. My input's a little hot. Hang on.
All right.
Sound settings. This is where the sausage gets made.
Never good. Don't. Yeah. Never mind.
It's fine. Where is that one? Do something, man. Master volume. Oh, maybe that's why. Can I turn that? What about that? Let me Sorry, folks.
Just that and everything else.
Now, mine's
Test. Oh,
mine's picking up a lot of background noise. I'm not even moving or doing anything here, and it's still picking up stuff. And it's odd because it's coming from. It synchronizes with you.
Here.
And I'm like, I've got my headphones on. There's no sound.
I'm gonna
coming
mute
out.
and see if it's coming from me.
Well, you'll need to talk then.
Yeah, I'm not entirely certain. Okay, it's picking up the wrong microphone. That's why.
Okay.
All right.
I think mine is just picking up ambient noise from the creaking of the house and stuff. So I'm good.
Yeah, it's probably
Your house
true.
is creepy.
Creepy.
It is not creepy. The PC term is haunted.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Is it ooky and spooky?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that? Okay, that's actually better, and that's going to sound nicer anyway.
And they are not ghosts. They are phantasm energy experiencing bodilessness.
Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
Well, they were ghosts, but now they identify as humans again. So all right, cool. I think now I'm good to go.
All right, ready for sound check?
Okie dokie. Yes. Let me get mine rolling. Sorry for the delay. Here we go. Audio sync for Krebs in 3, 2, 1.
Audio sync for the other Krebs in 3, 2, 1.
And audio sync for Daniel, which is not a Krebs, but am an honorary Krebs.
This
in
is true.
3, 2, 1. All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Dungeon Crawlers, where once again we have an amazing author interview for you for this episode. We have author Brandon Ying Kit Boey to talk about his debut novel, Karma of the Sun, which sounds fantastic. And it's too bad that right now you're not seeing the video of this as we're recording, because there's this amazing, brilliant halo that's around his head, which now we're going to be enlightened by the end of this episode. But what I'm really excited to hear about is the premise of your book. As we were talking about before we started recording, you mentioned this was a post-apocalyptic book, but what's different is it's Eastern based, where not the modern Western post-apocalyptic book that we're used to getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the and first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be with you. I love the post-apocalyptic genre for a lot of reasons. And it struck me one day that, wait a second, why is the world always ending in like a major Western city? Like what about the rest of the world? It seems, probably actually pretty unlikely that survivors are going to be, killing zombies in New York City, much as that's really cool to watch. And around the same time I was thinking about this, I came across some Eastern texts about the end of the world. There were 2 sutras in particular, Buddhist writings, that talk about the end of the world in a very specific way. There's one of them that talked about 7 apocalyptic suns, and as you read through it, at least to me, it was very apparent that they're describing like nuclear blasts. It's like after the first sun, the cities will burn, and after the second sun, the oceans and lakes will dry up, and the third, and I had a couple of thoughts. One was, and this is very weird, that it parallels, sort of the Judeo-Christian renditions of the apocalypse that we all know. The parallels were uncanny. And then, secondly, if all these disparate world cultures have this view about the end of the world, that's actually kind of bleak. Well, what does this say about our faith and belief in humanity? The fate of the world, that we all kind of have this thing hang, whether it's Judaism, Islamism, Buddhism, Taoism, right? All these and other things that don't end in any ism, they all kind of have this like expectation that the world's going to end. And so why is that? I started thinking about this, and I started thinking about like this, I mean, it really is very bleak to look at the world that way. And what if you have a person who's just starting off in their life? And then I thought about these 7 apocalyptic sons, and I thought, what if the first 6 have already occurred? So they know for sure the world is going to end. The 7th nuclear blast is coming, the 7th apocalyptic son. And you set the story between the 6th and the 7th from a young person who's just kind of starting off life. What could they do? Like, what could you do as a protagonist? Basically nothing, right? If the world is going to end. And I wanted to test that and think, can one person really change the fate of the world? What can that person do?
I find that really interesting. I'm also a really big fan of post-apocalyptic stories. The draw for me is how do you what vestiges of civilization are you able to save? And those pieces that are left, how do you use them to rebuild? How do you survive in the short term and rebuild in the long term? Those are the stories I like to see. Everything's broken down. What new thing is created from the ashes? But that's definitely a very Western influenced story. And they all kind of follow the same kind of path. And so I'm curious, what is the Eastern perspective on the apocalypse? Is it one of these things like is it resisting, fight, kicking and screaming against it? Is it acceptance? Is it somewhere in between? How would you summarize the Eastern philosophy of the apocalypse?
Yeah, it brings up more questions than there are answers, and why it's so fascinating, because I feel like it's a doctrine full of contradictions, because you could say that the Eastern Buddhist, Hindu philosophy is there is no end, right? The end is the end is just the beginning. It's indefinable. But then there's this concept of reincarnation, right? And reincarnating, if you die, return to the earth as something else, right? Another kind of creature. But if the earth is gone, then where do you return to? So this novel has this backdrop of reincarnation in the story, and that's another difference. Yeah.
Speaking of this book, I don't know if we've mentioned the title. Why don't you introduce the book to us, Brandon?
Sure. The book is called Karma of the Sun.
And this book just was released, right?
It just released yesterday.
As of this recording. By the way,
as of
folks,
this recording.
Yesterday means January 17th in this context.
Yes.
Yeah,
awesome.
And it's been pretty exciting. The pre-orders kind of exceeded expectations, and I heard that it's the hardcovers have actually, for now, sold out on Amazon, but still available on other through other fine booksellers. But yeah, it's been an exciting week.
Now, is this your first published novel?
It is.
So this is your very first outing. Your first outing in terms of a novel. Have you been published in other forms of writing, like
I have,
in the fiction area?
Not in fiction. I've been writing, ever since I was a child. It's kind of the one thing I always wanted to do. Wrote a lot of short stories, plays, poetry, and this book I've been working on and off over the course of 10 years. 3 different iterations of this, and just adding on more layers and more research. It was something that I wanted to tell. It never felt like I could get it right. And then a number of years ago, the you know it was sort of, the world was in this state where I think a lot of people started asking or thinking about the apocalypse. Just going through a like global pandemic. There was civil unrest and things like that. And I really started thinking about things in a little different way. Um, some of these themes of hope, some of these themes of why are we programmed to be self-destructive, as a human race, because we tell these stories, because we have this expectation, right? Um, is it harmful, or is there sort of um, something positive from that? Maybe the fact that all these disparate world cultures have this shared belief, this almost universal belief about how things play out, means that the solution is that we work together, we cooperate, and kind of binds us together. One culture is no better than another. We all share the same planet. We all can potentially share the same fate. We should work together to solve the problems of the world, and that's just something I really wanted to to talk about in this novel.
That's fascinating. Now, you said that you've been writing this book off and on for 10 years.
Mm.
In that time, as you're creating this narrative, as you're building this story, were there any major evolutions that took place in the way that you portrayed the protagonist? Were there any, like, maybe you started off with a protagonist of this flavor and then you ended up at a very different point in the spectrum? Were there any like major evolutions that took place there, or was your protagonist more the constant and then the story itself evolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the protagonist was always kind of constant. In fact, it started out with this image of this young man, walking towards a mountain. And I just kind of had that image pop into my mind, and it raised all sorts of questions like, who is he? Why is he traveling to this mountain? Why are there people who are trying to stop him? Um, what's special about this mountain? Why is it the last mountain on Earth? Why have there been earthquakes that have leveled, the rest of the land? And then it went quickly from that to the most mountainous part of the world, the Himalayas, this area that in the novel has been protected from nuclear fallout by the ranges, the Himalayan ranges. And now, as the seventh sun is nearing, uh, the mountains have all collapsed, and so now there's no place that's safe, and they're really forced to reckon with what's going to happen to them.
Interesting. That's, you talked about setting a little bit ago. New York City, West Coast, Midwest, and now Himalayas. Recently, my wife was really into watching some documentaries about climbing Everest, and just how inhospitable the terrain and the environment is to that. Do the six preceding suns have any effect on the environment there, or is it still just this? Is still the same frozen wasteland that Everest and the Himalayas are?
Yeah, it does. They do have an effect, and roughly, it's roughly as the story takes place, about 100 years since the last of the six suns. So they they don't really know much about the world before, like our times. They just see the effects of this world where they somehow know that they're the only ones left. They see these remnants uh, of civilization, like rusty aircraft and things like that. But because of these cataclysms, the world is sort of reeling. You see these earthquakes that transform the landscape every night. So they go to bed one way, they wake up, the land is completely reorganized. The Earth's wobbling, so even the stars are unfamiliar. They can't navigate. So they're living in in this environment that was created through nothing that they did. And so karma is a big part of this story. These people they've inherited the bad karma of, like our world, our times. These people who, I mean, I read someplace recently that we have like 3,000 nuclear weapons in the world, like enough to destroy this planet like many, many times over. And so they didn't have anything to do with that, but they're living with those consequences, this collective karma. And so the karma of the sun is sort of like a play on sun, this apocalyptic sun, but also he is the son of his father, who, is a central figure and carries this, is linked to kind of the curse of the world, and kind of this idea that we're, we have to sometimes grapple with like bad things that happen to us, because of other people's decisions and actions. But what can we do individually in the face of that?
So, what was one of the things that really stood out as you were writing this protagonist in the book? Were there certain things that, as you're writing the story, that really resonated with you as an individual, or is it just something that, like, wow, I really like this guy and this is why?
Well, I like this main character, this young man, because he's sort of like an everyday, ordinary person. There's this motif of like the chosen one. They're all believe in the reincarnation of the Lama, who will come and save them, because there's this prophecy that goes hand in hand with the prophecy of the end of the world. And so, he is the most unlikely person. He's got these insecurities because, of his background, because, he grew up not only believing in the end of the world, but believing that his father betrayed his village. And so he has this like big hole, like this big gap that he's trying to fill. And so I like that he has to be resourceful, and I like that because of that, he ends up attracting the help of a lot of people. So it's kind of like a weird superpower to have, where you're just bad at everything and people like want to help you. And that's how it starts. And I intentionally wanted, that to emphasize like kind of the arc that he takes. And towards the end, he goes from just not knowing any better and actually doing something that everyone's telling him is futile, and ends up leading people. But all through that, he shatters this without, with spoiling the story, he shatters this whole motif of the chosen one, where it's like there is no chosen one. We are all the chosen ones. And there's a quote that says, we're all the sons and daughters of the Buddha. We are all the ones that are here to take care of the land and lead each other.
Nice.
Now, it sounds like you were mentioning that this book is not so much a Western story as it is an Eastern story, or at least it's influenced by Eastern culture and mythology and religion. And I'm curious, did you take opportunities here to take things that were familiar and then invert them or manipulate them or make them strange and alien? That whole concept of like, yeah, this sounds familiar, but it's different now. It's, this has evolved over time, or it's been confused or lost to time, that sort of thing. Did you take opportunity to sort of like mutate what it is that we find familiar?
Yeah, I'm sure I did. I mean, I think setting this in a place that is in the future, but it's almost like medieval, is a way of inverting, because it's like, the post-apocalyptic genre is a subgenre of science fiction. So, when I tell people, I wrote a science fiction novel, it's called Karma of the Sun, they think space, they think, oh, it's set in the future, but actually it's very much like in the past. And there are places in Tibet today that look like Tibet hundreds of years ago, maybe even 1,000 years ago. And so I like the timelessness and the timeless feel of it, this idea of the cyclicality of the world, where these people living at near the end of the world, like time has completely a different meaning. Space has a totally different meaning. It's just almost irrelevant. And to be alive or dead also doesn't really matter, because they're living so close to death, to the point that they can hear the dead. Every night they go outside and they hear the howls of ghosts that are haunting them, and that are mourning their fate, because these ghosts know that they will not be reincarnated. So they're
Oh,
dead, but they're still suffering.
oh,
And
that's
so
interesting.
they're haunting those who are alive.
Given that I think you said this story takes place between the sixth and seventh sun events, right?
Yeah.
So what is the technology like at this time in your story?
It's low tech. They're using the types mechanical technology. There's no electricity. They're flintlock rifles, which some people still use now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also almost a mystical technology that they discover towards the end of the story.
Oh, yeah, this is fascinating, because like my brain is kind of like whirling with like, how does this world work? Like, as you were saying, there's flintlock. The very first thing I thought of is, oh, then they must have the ability to produce black powder.
Yeah.
So there's like a certain level of chemistry and science that has to be understood. Producing black powder outside of a highly controlled environment is actually extremely dangerous and difficult, and must be done a very specific way, right? So, but they're producing black powder, they're producing balls for these, flintlock weapons. Also, where are the flintlock weapons coming from?
Yeah.
Did they discover like an ancient hoard? Did they discover the technology and then reproduce it? Like, I don't necessarily need you to answer that. These are just the thoughts that are coming into my head as you're describing this world. And
Yeah.
you've got ghosts, you've got mysticism. I mean, this is pretty fascinating stuff. And so how does it end? I'm just curious. Like, how does the book I'm just teasing.
Does the world end or not? Yeah, no, you touched on sort of a lot of the excitement with the world building that came about. Tibet is just a fascinating place. There's far too little fiction written about it. I mean, this is a place where, in their everyday tradition and cultures, there's witches, there's shamans, there's demons, yetis, supernatural beings, even visitors from outer space, right? Just monks with powers, and ghosts and spirits, and lost cities. It's amazing. So just reading through some of this, I was like, somebody should write a book about this.
And it should be me, is what you thought. Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, well, if no one's going to do it, I'm going to give it a shot. And speaking of technology and sort of cool things, the one of the texts that I primary text that I research describes this stone. It's like this crystal where you can look into it and you can see the past, present, futures, basically describing a crystal ball. When I was researching it, I thought it's sort of describing like a crystalline structure that you can go inside. And so I had this idea of like a room where you have these prisms, and the prisms capture all the history of the world, like all the light that has been on the planet gets absorbed and refracted, and all the images are contained. But you can also enter and go through all these facets, and you can access the past and the future. And so they're kind of hanging their hopes on this, and some people want to use it to escape. Some people want to use it to control other people. Some people, want to go back to the past. And it's so, while you have this ticking time bomb of the seventh apocalyptic sun, you also have this race to be the first to find this room, this stone that comes out of this text.
And I'm sitting here wondering about like the antagonist of this story too, because on the one hand, just as you're describing it, again, folks at home, we were not able, because of the publishing time period and the release, we weren't able to get the book in advance prior to this interview. So I'm just telling you right now, I haven't read the book. But as I'm thinking about the way you're describing this story, on the one hand, the antagonist is really time, right? Like there is a finite amount of time. We know the world is coming to an end. And the question becomes, how do the people and the spirits who are lamenting the fact that they won't be reincarnated, how do they handle this? How do they face this? Is there a way to fight it? Is there a way to stop it? Human nature says it always wants to fight back, always wants to survive, but maybe that's not the right answer. Like, so on the one hand, like the antagonist sounds like time, but a question I have for you is, outside of the timeline itself, is there another antagonist? And is that antagonist like a person, a group of people, or is it some other aspect of the planet?
Yeah, who's the foil? Really?
Yeah. Well, Josh, for someone who hasn't read the book, I mean, you're spot on when you said the time is the antagonist. I love that you zeroed in on that. That's kind of how I see it, and that's kind of how I see the world in general. And who was, I think Margaret Atwood said, every novel is about time, or every story is about time, and that resonates with me. There are numerous foils and villains and antagonists, that help bring out that conflict. The main one is this is Hanumana, a minister who's sort of like the ruler over part of these territories. Comes across as a benevolent, figure in the beginning. Says he wants to help Karma. Says he knows his father, knows that the mission that his father went on was a noble one, and that despite what everyone said, he knows that his father succeeded, and that he, as the son of a Sherpa, has the same abilities that will help him pick up where his father literally left off in his search. And it turns out to be, somebody's very, very different. So, that's certainly one major foil. But then there are also other foils, people who are his friends. There's a nun in particular, an older woman who helps him, and at the end becomes sort of convinced that the world is going to end, and gives up hope, and really tests Karma, tests what he really believes, what he really cares about. So it's just like the lands that keep shifting. These characters are reflections of the insecurities of Karma. They're real people, a well-formed people, but they help him on this journey by trying him.
I like that.
Now it's time to chat about our sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is an award-winning world-building and writing software for people who love to create rich and exciting worlds. With their software, you can create your world, manage your campaign, plan your novel, create a world wiki, wow your players, make novels more interactive, and make your worlds come to life. You can find them at worldanvil.com, and if you put in the discount code DCR40, you will receive a 40% discount today.
So the book is sounding more and more interesting the more we get into it, but I don't want to ruin the whole, or I don't want to expose the whole story here. Let's talk about the writing process a little bit. So you're saying that this is your first published novel. A lot of people out there, a lot of our listeners also enjoy writing. And it seems like there's always this big hurdle of getting it out for other people to read it. And it used to be that the advice authors would give new writers is you've got to get an agent. Without an agent, there's no way for you to find a publisher or to get your book out there. That's not necessarily the case anymore. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you break through that barrier so you can get your work of that art out in front of other eyeballs?
Yeah, it was a long road, as we kind of said. Um, there were there was plenty of rejection along the way, lots of drafts, lots of people along the way who helped, whether giving feedback, introducing people. I really wanted to let this book take the time that it needed. And I say 10 years, I mean, it really was like just a long process. I knew it was something I wanted to do. I knew I knew the story I wanted to tell. And I knew that it just wasn't there. Every year people would ask me like, how's the book going? Like when are we going to see the book? And I remember it's like every birthday, every Christmas or something, just these annual markers. We'd be like, I'm still working on it. And then at one point, I know this probably maybe is, I don't know, it's too much detail from what you were asking, but there was one point I remember telling my wife, I don't think it's going to happen. Like this book is not going the way I think it should, and I think I'm going to have to quit. And by this point, I'd already spent like 5 years, and she was like, "What? No, you're just having a bad day." I'm like, no. Like, listen, I'm not being unnecessarily hard on myself. I know objectively, like this sucks. Like it's not good. If I persist on this path, I'm just going to take a perfectly good story and ruin it for some other better writer. And the moment I said this, and I really meant it, like everything changed. I felt like I'd passed some test for myself where before I just wanted to be published. I just wanted to be a published writer. It's the only thing I ever really wanted. And then I realized at that point I cared more about this story and the writing than I did about my own personal ambition. And then like just everything changed. I just wasn't afraid anymore because I had literally failed. I not only come close to failing, I had written myself off as like, I'm just going to be like a failed writer. And it's okay. I can always enjoy reading, and that's fine. And I'm willing to walk away from it. From that moment on, just everything started clicking. I didn't walk away from it. A month later, I came back, and then the words just flowed. I sent it out to a bunch of agents and didn't hear anything for like half a year. And then one weekend, it was like the same weekend, I got a bunch of replies, like from, can you send me a partial manuscript, to send me the full manuscript, to I'd like to talk to you and maybe offer you representation. And I basically accepted the first offer I got, which was my agent, Tamara Kawar, who she's since moved agencies at ICM, which is a big New York City agency. And I was just I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. But then it was more work, and she was very editorial type of agent, just getting the process of working it. And then it's funny, when it finally got done, that was when it was COVID. And so we went out for this post-apocalyptic book during COVID, and the civil unrest in the wake of George Floyd's death. And we went on submission around the time of between the elections and the Capitol riot. And every publisher is like, no. Like,
you kidding me? It's the most appropriate time to release a book like this.
If we
it's on everyone's mind.
They're like, well, just turn on the news. Thank you if you want post-apocalyptic, like this grim. Like, does he have a romantic comedy instead? Like, we like his writing. Like, and so we literally thought like it just wasn't the right time. And I remember the agent said to me like, I'm sorry, the market has spoken.
Well, there's something beautifully ironic about the fact that the title of your book contains the word karma in it. At the time of all this going on.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing that I really like, as a fellow author that has also gone down this path, is you finally came to a point where it's like, I don't care. I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna write my story. I'm gonna do what I need to do to finish this. And then it just came flooding back. I've hit that wall many times where it's like, man, I got to get this book out. But you hit this point where it's like, I just don't care anymore. I just want to tell the story. And it's like there's something out in the universe. I don't know. This is like, all right, write a passage over, and then it just all comes flooding in. So that's fantastic. But no, I agree with Krebs there, where he's talking about how karma is in the name of your book and just all the crazy things that were going on at that time. But you're here. You've arrived despite those challenges, despite the adversarial things that were happening in the world, to write this story. And now here it is, and it's out for the public to pick up and read. And definitely congrats on that. It's not an easy road. You've done it.
Yeah, actually, my favorite part of your process story is that you hit that point of self-evaluation that like that was a pinnacle point in your life. There are myriad multiverse versions of this where you stopped writing and this story never actually saw the light of day, right? But in this timeline, you passed that test that you were talking about. You passed that, and after you passed that moment, you went from this unsure, unsteady, unstable, unfinished thing to this unstoppable juggernaut, because you hit a pandemic and that didn't stop you. You hit civil unrest, that didn't stop you. new president, new government, that didn't stop you, et cetera. Like, there was that point where you could have stopped you and you didn't, and because of that, it became this thing that was unstoppable. I think that's a really beautiful aspect of this story.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I really love that. Yeah, reflecting on it, it's interesting how we hear about the writer's journey, and it's because of this. So much of writing is personal. You transform and change. Yeah, you never hear about like the accountant's journey. Nobody.
I'm an accountant.
Nothing against accountants, but it's like, write is something about writing that really just like tears your at your soul. You really have to bleed a bit, right, to get it out on paper.
Anytime you're creating something that has never, it requires a piece of you to have it be done. It's not just a sacrifice. It's not just a sacrifice of like effort, which of course it is. But when you say it took you, 10 years of your life off and on, if we condensed all the writing time down, that's still literally years of your life that you invested in getting a story out just for other people to read and have opinions about, right? Like, to experience that. Whenever you're creating something, it costs you. And it's not just the effort, it's the time, it's the, like you had moments, I'm sure, many innumerable moments of self-doubt. You also had moments of great success and personal growth. It cost you to make this thing happen. And that's something so distinct and unique to creation. So many people work jobs where they perform a process and there's some output or there's some product or there's some service, sure. But it's more like they're completing a formula or an equation, as opposed to they're creating something living that they put out into the world, right? Creation is so different from anything else that we do as humans in terms of occupation. So I think it's really kind of incredible that you sacrificed what you sacrificed in order to create this thing that just hit shelves yesterday.
Well, here's a question for you guys, because you have spoken to a lot of creators and writers, and you're all well read. Following along those lines, the sacrifice, the long process of someone who's kind of new to this process, and the price that they have to pay to create something versus someone who's experienced and tenured, and maybe there's less suffering, less pain. Do you feel like there are people, established writers that who their early work is like always just better because they had to suffer more because they were less experienced, and it's like, yeah.
Actually, yes, but I'm going to take a slightly different turn from authors. James Cameron. James Cameron, the
Director.
film, yeah, the director,
Yeah.
right? Like you could look at the tome of his work, and it could easily be argued that every picture he has made has only grown in scope and size. From Terminator 1, I realize he had other films, I get that, but from like T1 to The Abyss to T2 to Titanic to Avatar 2 to Avatar 17, whatever, right? Like every film he does in terms of size and scope, it gets bigger and he does riskier things. And for that, I am appreciative. But if you look at the story, and this is my hot take, real opinions coming through, right? Like here's my take. Terminator 1 was innovative. I mean, I realize story-wise maybe it wasn't totally new, but it was this brilliantly executed concept, and it started a whole genre of AI, sci-fi terror kind of stuff, right? T2 also like put that genre on the map and refined it and made it something that so many other films had to live up to. The Abyss, for heaven's sake, if you folks at home, if you haven't seen The Abyss, you have missed out on a completely unique and beautiful and extraordinary film. And then you get to Titanic, which is historical fiction, kind of munched together. And then we get to Avatar, and then we get to Avatar Way of Water. And like as he goes through, these things are getting larger in scope, but the story is losing its soul. It's just tropish rehash in a different setting. He went from completely distinct and unique to, giant blue Pocahontas. And it's to your point, to your question, Brandon, the thing I'm trying to say here is, while he is achieving great cinematic technological success, his stories now are the things that are suffering. He has all these resources and access to all these things where he can do really immense exposition and display. The medium by which he tells his story is enormous. But what story is he telling? The most vapid, retold, hollow experience with every movie that he makes thereafter, right? Like that. So for me, that's an example of someone whose storytelling was better when he had to suffer for it. Whereas now he has the world and he can't tell a story that's new.
Yeah, no, I see. I think it's definitely different for filmmakers than it is for authors. I think as authors, our writing levels up. It gets better the more we do. I know my second book was much better than my first one, and so on. And we see quite often, and this isn't the same for everyone. I think this is kind of different for everyone. We have seen some authors where you're right, that first book was great and fantastic. The other ones just kind of weren't that wonderful. I really think it's the focus. Definitely that first book is full of passion and excitement because you're putting everything into it, all your heart and soul into that. And then that has to change as you get more book deals or things like that. And I think the writers that focus on the people, that they're fans, and they want to deliver a good product to them, I think they succeed at continuing to write better each and every book because they realize if they don't deliver, they're not going to have a fan base. And I think that's really what drives a lot of those authors to be better in their writing. And for those that just don't care anymore because they got a really great idea and they were thrown tons of money, it's all about the money instead of the joy of writing, of telling the story. And that's probably where James Cameron went wrong. It's no longer about the joy of telling the story. It's all about how much more money can I sink into this and make this fancy and amazing.
It might be also like he's trying to recreate the challenge by taking on what he thinks are bigger, more elaborate projects, but it's just maybe technical difficulty, but the storytelling, isn't the same level that it was. But you bring up another interesting question, which is having a fan base. So that's something I have no experience with because I don't at this point I don't have any fans.
You're
right?
about to.
Yeah. Well, it's quite interesting. when your book goes out, you're going to have people that are not going to like it. I don't know why, but for some reason, you're going to have people that are just not going to like the story.
Haters gonna hate.
They're going to find reasons to hate it or whatever. But you're going to find people that love it. I mean, I will admit, when my first book came out, when someone came up to me and said, "Man, I love this story," and I'm like, "Really?" Like, and not like in this really bad way, but like I've read tons of other authors and I love their books, and I was just like, no, I don't compare to them. But this one kid was just like, I love the book, and just was going on and on about all these details, and I'm like, wow, this kid has really read this book, and I'm like, okay, how many times have you read it? And it's like, well, I think this is like the 17th time I've read through it. And I was like, 17, really? Like, but you'll have those moments when you hear that and you're like, wow, I've really made a difference in this person's life. They've enjoyed the material I've created. And then you get fired up to write again, and you get fired up to come up with another concept or another idea or write a sequel or whatever. So it's definitely a fun roller coaster ride. My suggestion would be ignore any bad reviews. Just haters be hating, pretty much, and just go on, look at the ones that are positive, and more focus on the ones that say, hey, this was a great book, however this these constructive criticism items inserted. I had one that I got that, and it was fantastic, and it gave me the entire plot for the second book in that series, because it's like, all right, yeah, I mentioned this item in the beginning, and then I never did anything with it, and then it's like, and then on a car ride to a convention, like the idea just bloomed out, and I grabbed the recorder and plotted out the entire second book. So you never know, but
that's so cool.
It is. And with your premise, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of really cool ideas to come up with. Maybe you'll be at a convention and you'll see someone cosplaying one of your characters. I want to see that day happen.
I want to see that as well.
It has some great opportunities. I'm gonna throw it back over to Krebs because it looked like he had some comments.
Daniel, something you said earlier kind of sparked some thought, because you're right. When it comes to writing, when it comes to storytelling in general, and actually I think this does apply to filmmakers also, like any creative really, your first story is typically not going to be your best over time, because like you pointed out, your voice as a storyteller evolves as you gain experience, right? Like so conceptually, in the typical scenario, if you write 3 books, the third book is going to have a better writing voice than your first book, right? That's the concept. That's probably the general outcome. So this question is to both of our authors, Daniel and Brandon. So like, you've got some authors are just wildly prolific, and if it is the case that one's writing voice improves over time with experience, which makes sense, is there ever this concept of like an apogee? Is there ever like this concept of like in television we say jumping the shark, where you get to a point where like your voice is pristine, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but because you write so well, you think everything you have to say is of value, and then there becomes that like area of like you stop self-editing? Do you think that's ever like a risk where it's like, yes, they write beautifully, they just write too much?
I've never gotten to that point, so I can't answer.
But you've read so many books. Have you seen authors? Do you see authors suffer from that? Or has your experience mostly been that like authors, as their voice evolves, so does their ability to tell a story, and they know where to like trim the fat?
I think it varies. There, in my opinion, there are some authors which I just feel like, they get better at the editing game. They get better at telling the story, and you can tell. And then there's others where I just don't feel like it's there. I don't want to name names, but yeah, there are definitely some that I definitely feel. We'll give it over to Brandon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, and I had another thought as you were describing that, and using the metaphor of like an actor. And we all know actors that are amazing to watch. They're just regarded as very talented actors, like Al Pacino, right? But they play this basically the same character all the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And they just do it really well, and we love it, and we give them awards, and it's convincing, but it's like the same actor in every role in every movie. And I wonder if that could happen to a writer or creator, where you get so good at playing one actor, one role, that you end up doing it all the time, versus like a Philip Seymour Hoffman, where like he's an amazing actor in every movie. It's like a totally different person.
What you just described is a game that I like to play with my brother and some of my friends called actor or entertainer, right? Where the idea is, can they actually transform who they are for each role? Or is it really just the same character, just with like a different level of whatever? Like, for example, Vince Vaughn is always Vince Vaughn, just with a different level of intensity and snark, right? Like
Yeah.
he's always Vince Vaughn, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of expanding on what you guys have said already, I think there's a comfort level, when we get, when we're writing a series, sometimes it's just so hard to break away from those characters and that setting and try something new, or to expand upon what we want to write, that the excitement of exploring, of trying something new, of researching and writing a different story gets us kind of pigeonholed. There are some writers out there that they haven't written anything other than this one series. And it would be nice to see something different. It would be nice to see a change. But at the same time, I get it. When you're comfortable with that, it's easy to write that. But I think we lose some of the magic in the writing when we get so comfortable with this character that it starts losing the excitement of the next book. So those authors that have long series, but they jump to other things, I think really benefits where they keep that excitement up.
Yeah, I had this thought of, have we ever seen a writer, or have you guys seen a writer jump from genre to genre just to keep that fresh? So they're doing a thriller in one book, and the next book they are doing like a romantic comedy, and then the next one, fantasy. Have you seen anyone do that successfully?
Yeah, I mean, I have a good friend, Dave West. He's a writer. He writes like very Conan-esque, Conan the Barbarian-esque stories. And then he writes Weird West novels. And so, those are completely different. And he does that really successfully. And he's trying other things. I know of Michael Brent Collins. He writes primarily horror, but he's written fantasy, he's written sci-fi, and more recently he wrote a romance novel, which he did fairly successfully. And he did that because he wanted something else. He did the romance one so that something his wife could read and not like be terrified. He wrote the fantasy stuff for his wife, but then he also wrote a fantasy kids novel so his kids could read it. So there's purpose and desire behind there. But I really think if you're a good writer, you can tell any type of story, no matter what genre.
Yeah. In our interview with Brandon Sanderson the other day, he mentioned that he's in the middle of this Wheel of Time. He's writing the Wheel of Time, every fan's dream. And he says, I had to put it down for a minute. And so he went and wrote Mistborn Era 2. The Alloy of Law, the first book in that series. He said, and I've heard him describe it in other places as a palate cleanser. He needs to get away, do something different so his brain circuits reset, and then he comes back to work on the main project. And I think that a lot of his books work that way. If you look at his, he gives weekly updates on YouTube, and he will mention that this week he's gotten this far on Stormlight, and then the next week there's no Stormlight thing, but he's talking about Defiance, whatever this I can't remember it now, but it's the new series with the new sci-fi series that he's working on. And he'll switch from book to book and series to series, stuff that he's working on, so he doesn't get burned out on things. And that's what I think a lot of authors suffer from. They'll get into a rut, And this is and they fall into this trap of thinking this is all that they can write because they're not feeling inspired for anything else. And getting out of that comfort zone, I think, is where the growth happens.
Yeah.
So, Karma of the Sun hit shelves on January 17th. You said that the hardcover has already sold out on Amazon, but might be available at other purveyors of books. Where are some key places where we can find Karma of the Sun?
I would say support your independent booksellers. Many of them do have copies. I understand that also Barnes and Nobles has available hard copies. And of course, if you like audiobooks, which I love audiobooks, that is also available. And I have to say the recording, the production quality, and the voice actor Kyung Sim does an amazing job. Just the lyricism of his delivery of the, and the character voices. It's mesmerizing. It really is. I was blown away. I have a 6-year-old son who's like, "You did not write this." It's like, it sounds like a real book.
It sounds like a real book.
That's awesome.
Thanks, son.
Yeah.
Thank you. That sounded like a real compliment.
Yeah, that actually.
Yeah.
So just taking a look on Amazon right now, folks. The hardcover is sold out. However, there is a paperback version of it available right now. It is a little bit less, but if you don't want to wait for the hardback, this is a way for you to pick it up, or you can pick it up on Audible through audiobook. Definitely pick up a copy if you like post-apocalyptic or just good storytelling. This sounds like a fantastic story to pick up and start reading. It is winter. A lot of us aren't running around outside. Snag a copy so you can snuggle up next to the fireplace or your heater or just on the couch. And maybe the idea of Karma Under the Sun will warm you until the sun actually comes out and starts becoming spring. But no, Brandon, thank you for coming on the show and talking about your book and writing. But before we go, we have Krebs does something which we missed last week that every author has to go through, and that is the lightning round.
I need to get a hold of Brandon Sanderson just for a lightning round conversation. So Brandon, I forgot to mention this before the show, but at the end of the episode, I love to do a lightning round with all of our first time guests. And it's very simple. It's very basic. You don't have to worry about it. Basically, I'm going to ask you some questions. They're typically extremely easy questions. I just want the first answer that comes off the top of your head. Are you ready?
Yeah. And so I want to hear you do this with the other Brandon Sanderson when you do have him back.
Yes. Yes. I also want to hear how that goes. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Ready, set, go. Brandon, what is your favorite color?
Green.
What's your favorite band? Let me change it. What is one of your favorite bands?
The Beatles.
Okay.
Excellent. Abbey Road, White Album. Which Beatles? Which era?
Abbey Road.
Wonderful. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
Dogs, cats, birds, fish, none of the above.
Cats.
Favorite food?
Sushi.
Good choice.
I'm not gonna lie. I was really hoping that was the answer, and it's because sushi's my favorite food too.
Is it?
Yes, it is. And finally, what is your stance on the 1983 sci-fi fantasy film Crawl?
I think I haven't thought about that novel, that movie since the 80s. That's my stance.
Fair enough. Did you watch that when you were a kid?
Yeah, I did.
When you were a kid, did you like it?
Oh yeah.
Fair enough. I'll take it. I'll chalk that up for nostalgic win. Thank you. That's it. That's the end of the lightning round. You did great. You get an answer for everything.
We survived.
Thank you. And thank you for having me, guys. This was awesome. I hope to be back.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back. Now, where can our listeners find you? because clearly we want them to, you know, follow you with, if you're on social media or whatever. If you have a website, just to be updated on any new and exciting things that come out from you.
They can follow me on Instagram at Bowie Books, BoeyBooks, on Twitter at Brandon YK Bowie, or on my website, BrandonYingKitBoey.com.
All right.
Brilliant.
All right, folks. So rush out there, pick up a copy of Karma of the Sun, and enjoy this fantastic post-apocalyptic tale that is not what we're used to, but sounds like it's something that we will love. So with that said, we'll catch you next time.
Let your geek flag fly. So say we all.
And whether it's the end of the world or not, always remember to be epic and don't suck.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.